Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for keeping you waiting. It was true, I was hosting the Australian Minister of Trade, Craig Emerson, who in our dinner conversation actually said, "Did you know Kim Anderson?" I said, "Yes, I know Kim Anderson. I'm seeing him tonight." So he sends his best regards. He said he hasn't seen you for 20 years. Would that be right? So anyway, we had lots of trade talks today. Over dinner, we spoke about a subject which is probably dear to this conference, which was about the carbon trade tax in Australia. So I think I have had a whole day of trade talks as well as very much on the topic that you have been discussing for the last 2 days. So I don't propose to give a keynote speech, really, because I would actually rather hear from you what you have been saying all this 1.5 days, and hopefully give me some ideas. Let me just share with you what's in the heads of policymakers these days when this topic comes up. We normally start with the food price, volatility, and then food security, and then climate change. But here you've put climate change first. But I think it's all what we are thinking about. And as the Minister of Trade, who deals also with domestic trade policy. So in some countries, ministers of trade only deal with the international trade aspect, but my portfolio covers both domestic and international trade. So I have to think on both sides. And food prices is obviously very high up in the minds of policymakers these days. I think you've probably been discussing very intensively for the last 1.5 days all about why is the price of food high, what are the factors that are causing it, what are the policy responses. So I won't go into that except to say that I think the context of high food prices, which scared us all in 2008, was back again in 2010, but seems to have a little bit calmed down right now. Yeah, and one of the factors causing the somewhat declining or at least stabilizing food prices is the climate is in favor of food production right now, with the drought receding in Australia, and today one of our conversations was about how fat Australian cows have become. This has to do with agriculture policy on the weight of cows that come in to Indonesia. So he was saying that with the drought receding in Australia, with lots of rain, lots of food, the cows are actually fatter. So the wheat is also growing. Similarly, in Russia, I think the climate change issue has also receded. So you've got increased production again. And for us, obviously, rice being the most important price for the staple food is actually fairly stable in the international market. We've had increases domestically, but at least the international price is in favor. But that doesn't mean we need to be not concerned. I think we're always thinking about what do we have to do in the short term? What do we have to do to anticipate what's happening in the short term? And then you have the medium-term agenda. And I think the financial crisis took us away a little bit from thinking about food security. But now we really need to rethink that issue very deeply again. Just because whatever you do, it's going to take at least 10 years before you're going to have any impact on increasing productivity. So you have to start today, even though the short-term scare seems to be a little bit receding. And I think all that you've probably talked about since yesterday will indicate that the factors that caused the 2008 increase is very similar to the one that caused the 2010 increases. So it's a combination of climate change factors, weather shocks, as well as the excess liquidity going into commodity markets, energy prices, and underinvestment in agriculture and low stocks. Very similar situation, except maybe the increased liquidity going into commodity markets and weather shocks having more of an impact. I think that's kind of I'm summarizing all the discussions that at least I've monitored in the last few months, and we all know that the impact is mostly on the poor. Yeah, and certainly in this country, that's what we deal with mostly. And I think it's the issue is that supply increases have been behind demand increases. Yeah, that's one of the factors that we have monitored. And in 2008, when there was a lot of discussion and a lot of intensive analysis, including for Indonesia, I think one of the factors that is foremost in why there was such a low increase in supply compared to demand increases has been the underinvestment in agriculture, in research, in technological development. And that was partly because of the distorted agriculture policies, which then led us to all the discussion about the importance of concluding Doha, how the distorted agriculture subsidies, domestic support schemes had depressed prices to the extent that there was an investment, lack of an incentive to invest in agriculture as well as in technology. And I think we are still in that same situation now. So now let me, I was just trying to remind myself what the context that we are facing, but I'm sure this is something that you are all familiar with as an audience that is very much into this topic. So let me just share with you two things tonight. What am I thinking, or what we are thinking as the national policy? You know, so the big question for us as a policymaker is: so what do we do? What do we need to do nationally? What do we need to do regionally? And what do we need to do multilaterally? Let me just share with you these thoughts, and then we can open up for discussion. If all of you still feel like staying on for discussion. It's a bit late at night. You've had a long day, so not sure what the appetite is for further discussion. But this is certainly a very, very strategic topic, and it is the topic that will be discussed in all the international fora, all the way to the G20. But nationally, I think we always think about short-term and long-term responses. And for the short-term response, I think 2008 was really very eye-opening and very important period for us to actually hone in on what should be our policy. And I think fortunately we came up more or less on the right side of it, although I think we haven't really been very successful yet on the medium-term response. At least in the short term, we know that it's about making sure you have enough reserves domestically. So the stock of staple foods that you have to have domestically, including the need for import when you have to import, is a very crucial part of the policy. And compensating poor households. So I think one of the lessons that, well, we worked hard to get politically to get this accepted domestically. If you have food prices going up by 100%, which happened in 2008, the answer is not to control the price, not to try to stop the price increase, because it would immediately mean you have to subsidize the price somehow, yeah? And we just don't have the administrative capacity or the instrument to do that. It was better to allow the price to go up and compensate the poor households. We made, I think, that decision more or less, with exception of one or two commodities, but by and large, that was the decision we made. And we did go for partly cash transfer program, and the other part was in-kind providing food. And cash for work program and so on. So I think we learned a lot from that experience to when this hit, and to use fiscal policy, reduce tariffs, reduce the cost of importing, and use export taxes to ensure sufficient domestic supply. So fiscal policy and cash transfers. Since then, what have we learned? In 2011, beginning of 2011, we have done more or less the same when the price went up. We used fiscal policy, maximized the use of fiscal policy to reduce the cost of imports. So you minimize the impact of the volatile food price domestically, and you you also do compensation policies for poor households. But I think what we haven't got right yet is when the crucial issue is the stock of the staple. You've got to have correct information on the stock of rice, in our case. And you have to have that information in advance of you having to make the decision. And that's maybe where we're still working on getting the right information on stocks. On prices, I think we have pretty good information, but on stocks, we don't, and this is something we're working on. So coming up with an early warning system. Although I'm not sure, this is a good question for all of you, how much reliability can you get on stock information anyway, and how timely can they be? I asked this question to the USDA. I remember asking this because I always thought we have to have this, some kind of very accurate system to measure the stocks of staples. And their answer was that the USDA actually doesn't have data on stocks. What they monitor is prices, because really price is the most recent, most up-to-date information that tells you about stocks, and you can do the modeling then based on the price information. So at least that's something we should get better. That tells me that getting the right price information as the signal and having the right models to be able to make estimations on supply is where we need to go on that. In the medium run, obviously, you want to increase production, right? And how does climate change fit in all this? To me, as a policymaker, the climate change is the unexpected effect that it has on production. That's one very clear direction that it would affect food security and price volatility. But it would also, I'll talk a little bit about this later, the interaction between trade policy and climate change. This is a subject that I recall 3 years ago, I think, when you were gathering here in Bogor. Was that 3 years ago or 4 years ago? We addressed this topic. But the medium run, I think in the medium run, how do you increase food production question? Given climate change, given the increased unexpectedness of climate change, it is still the issue of technology development to deal with the climate change effects. That's still going to be a big topic, and for Indonesia, that's going to be a continued question. And I think even in a country like Indonesia with a lot of land, one thing that President Kuroda from the ADB mentioned to us 2 weeks ago when we met him in Bali was that increasing production is going to be more about increasing productivity because you have limited land and water. Even in a country like Indonesia where we have a lot of land, we've just had 2 days of discussion in Bogor, and the number one issue was, okay, we want to expand production. We need the land. Where is the land going to come from? We had lots of discussion about how there's land that's already conserved for forests, etc., etc. And there's a limitation to how much you can expand just based on increasing production, based on increasing land size. But productivity, and if you have limited land and water and you want to increase productivity, then you have to come up with technologies probably that will require less water, because there is limited water. And I think water scarcity, in the language of President Kuroda, he thought water scarcity was a more important issue than oil, than fuel. You have substitutes for oil, but you don't have substitutes for water. I mean, that point kind of woke me up a little bit. And he thought that Indonesia was actually in a better position than India, in China or Pakistan, because they have limited water. We still have 10 times more water, according to him, compared to India, China, and Pakistan. This is, I think, for this audience, a very important issue. But that, I think, is something that in the technology, in the leading up to the climate change, is going to be a big question out there in terms of how you're going to increase productivity and production. Okay, so that's kind of on the national policy agenda. And it turns out that the fiscal policy side becomes very challenging. We've just come up with a presidential instruction on the response to climate change. I think that's the translation for it. There's a lot of issues there about technology, production, and so on. But one big item is providing contingency in your budget. Yeah, some allocation in your budget. At the moment, our food contingency for emergency based on climate change or on natural disaster is about 2 trillion, which is about $200 million. So that's a contingency fund that you can draw on to buy food or to undertake compensation, cash transfer compensation or whatever, to respond to climate change. But is that enough or not? Is that the right way for a country to respond, apart from having a stockpile? And again, stockpile, how much of a stockpile? You know, these are, I think, questions we're still facing. Now, let me turn to the regional cooperation and international cooperation, which gets more interesting, perhaps. And I want to actually throw out some issues for you. Let's start with the biggest one, which is the WTO and Doha round. We have lots of experts in this room. If those of you who read the Financial Times editorial 2 days, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, basically saying that forget Doha, Doha is dead, we need to go to Plan B. That was kind of the conclusion of the editorial. Now, since I'm a Minister of Trade, I can't really take a position on that, but needless to say, what I can say is that concluding Doha is very challenging, given the U.S. political cycle. Let's just leave it at that. And so, what is the Plan B? You know, and we had hoped that we could remove the distortions in agriculture through Doha with I think it's already quite a good package that we had. More agriculture is not the stumbling block in the Doha negotiations. It's the sectorals, it's all the other issues. I think more or less agriculture, we feel, had more or less stabilized and come to a good outcome. But if you have no Doha, then you have no agriculture package, and you have no means to reduce the subsidies, distorting domestic support, and so on. So what are we going to do? So could a Plan B, this is a question for you, given the food security, urgency of the food security issue, could agriculture be a single sectoral agreement without it being in a single undertaking? Because you could not get the point about the agriculture negotiations is that you cannot get removal of distorting domestic support and agriculture and export subsidies without it being in a multilateral round. You couldn't get it in a bilateral negotiations or a regional negotiations. That was why Doha was so important when you are talking about removing distortions in agriculture. So if you're not going to have Doha, what's the answer to removing the distortions in the agriculture policy, which is causing the underinvestment in agriculture, etc., etc. So I quite frankly do not know the right answer yet, but it is going to be a very important question ahead of us. Plus the not yet concluded multilateral agreement on the climate change. This was where we were in 2007 when we were having this discussion that without a multilateral agreement on the climate change, you will, while waiting for that, lots of countries have started to come up with policies in the name of climate change, whether it's a carbon tax or CO2 emission standards for their products and so on, which can be or has been, could be trade distorting. And how do we deal with this? Is the WTO rules sufficient, or do we need to come up with a possible mini round? I think this has been a suggestion that has come out from Peterson Institute. Gary Hufbauer, amongst others, has done a lot of work on this. Or do we just need to have a much better open discussion on this between trade ministers and climate change people? What will the G20 discuss? G20 has a whole agenda on food security. It's about transparency of information, it's about international coordination, it's about risk management and increasing agriculture production and productivity. But their focus, because of the finance minister's process, has been on how to reduce the volatility of commodity prices due to financial derivatives. So a lot of focus is on there, rather than on a wider agenda, which is, I think, needs to be done when you're talking about food security. Macro policy coordination. How do you, it's the subsidies issue, the social safety nets that you have to finance within fiscal policy, and the investments in agriculture that you must do under a fiscal policy regime. What kind of fiscal policy regime? Financial cooperation on contingency, on risk instruments, whether it's insurance policies or forward commodity markets, hedging for risks, and increasing production and productivity. How do you cooperate in food reserves? If if you want to have this discussion, a lot of discussion was done in 2008. Countries should not restrict exports, and countries should not buy imports at all costs, because that was one of the causes of the very sharp rise in prices. But if countries do not have enough to feed their own population, are they wrong to impose export restrictions? Question mark. The answer is it's not wrong, but how can you do it in a way that does not cause fluctuation in prices of food, which then actually hits them back again? This is exactly what happened with Vietnam in 2008 when they restricted exports of rice. The world price of rice doubled in 2008, and the domestic price of rice in Vietnam also doubled in 2008. The answer is some kind of food reserves scheme. And this is something, big debate going on out there, how to do that in a way that is manageable, that is operational. And in ASEAN, ASEAN plus 3, we are going to be having a rice reserves emergency scheme that will be beginning this year. It's not a big amount. It's about 980,000 tons of rice. But it was originally intended for when you have a natural disaster or some emergency, countries can draw on it. It hasn't really talked about it being more than that. But potentially, it could be more than that. So if people are drawing a parallel to that with the reserves for foreign exchange, the swaps and the multilateralization of the foreign exchange reserves that countries can draw on in a confidence crisis. So this is where the situation with regional discussions. I think there's a lot of discussion out there, but definitely food security, not in the narrow sense, but in that wider sense that I just mentioned, including the climate change dimension, is going to be a very important and strategic sets of discussions with a lot of unanswered issues. And for us, I think in the regional context, I think the issue of food reserves and thinking through about some kind of contingency for food reserves, and then in the more medium run, how do you cooperate on increasing productivity is going to be a few of the challenges. And I think in the WTO, I would think that the climate change trade policy nexus discussion is going to be coming back again as a major topic. I'll close on that. Probably I talked for longer than I had planned, but I'm open to any questions if you wish, or if you are too tired. I won't take it I won't take it personally if you decide that you don't want to have any more discussion, because I know you've had a long day. But feel up to you whether you want to have a further discussion. Anybody want to? Oh, okay.
One is a regional reserve, the ASEAN +3 proposed rice regional reserve. It seems to me the amount has been increased from 700,000 to 900, almost 1 million tons. That's good news. Could you vision how we can operationalize this reserve? So where that reserve should be, or it should be just a coordinated reserve from the national reserves? How do you trigger the interventions? So that's one question. Second question is about the carbon trade. You mentioned about your talk with the minister from Australia. Could you share a little bit more information? What would be the position of Indonesia in terms of carbon trade? Indonesia has lots of forestry. Meantime, it also needs to produce lots of food, and including fuels. So that would have implications on carbon. So what sort of latest thinking do you have in terms of the carbon trade? Thank you.
I think on the first question, actually it may be, just as the foreign exchange reserves contingency and how you would draw on it, put some, in a way, discipline on your policy, on your macro policy and so on. I envisage that if the food reserves goes beyond a natural disaster or emergency situation, then the triggers would also go towards some kind of mechanism where if the price went up by a certain amount and your stocks fell by a certain amount, then you have the possibility to draw on these reserves, or you have a natural disaster, or you have some kind of emergency that is very clear. Yeah, that would be the trigger, and the price, I think, would be the market price. Yeah, it would be a market price base. It would be market price based with a possibility of, if there was a funding scheme of some sort for the lesser developed countries, then it could also be combined with that. But we haven't really thought through. I think there has not been. This is more the Agriculture Ministry's discussion. But as far as I know, they're still discussing on how to actually operationalize it. But I think it's also something that's not necessarily physical. It's in your each of your countries, and it can be supplemented, just like the bilateral swap is. It started with the bilateral swap, and then it went into the multilateral regional reserves. So you could still also have the bilateral, also a series of bilateral commitments, if you like. If I need stocks because we are in this agreement, I have the commitment, or the confirmation at least, that I can draw from you. Yeah. That's because that's, in a way, that's kind of already happening bilaterally between a number of the ASEAN countries. So I think that's, in a way, what we're trying to see develop. But I think on top of that, how do you use risk management instrument, hedging instruments, and some kind of insurance scheme instruments to also reduce the cost when you have a huge price increase? Just much like the way in the macro situation when you're actually not doing anything wrong, but there's a confidence crisis out there. How do you protect yourself from a shock, basically? Are there financial instruments? Are there contingency measures out there that can help, not eliminate, but reduce in the event of a price shock? Can you reduce the cost it has on a country? But the most important thing, we know, at whatever price, you have to have the physical stock in your country, and that's I think one possibility. On the carbon trade and carbon on the carbon trade for Indonesia, again, this is something which is early days still for us. We don't have really the pricing mechanism or the trading schemes in place yet, and a lot of it would depend on the CO2 emission measurements, which again, will need a lot of work for us, but it is definitely in our agenda, and in fact we are cooperating a lot with Australia on this. Ross Garnaut, as you know, is one of the leading thinkers on this. He has helped on the fiscal policy side. Yeah, we have a kind of like mainstream, putting a green, what is it called? Green growth fiscal policy, is that? What? Yeah. In the fiscal policy side. Now, how do we incorporate that into the carbon trading? I think that's still an ongoing process.
Question from other part of the world. Probably you know that the European Common Agricultural Policy is being revised, and it's a final stage of putting the new system to the drawing board and adopting this for 2013. And my question is, do you follow up this? Do you have any interest? What is going on with the CEP reform? And do you have any expectations if you feel that this is important for, let's say, Indonesia?
Yes, of course it's important because, in the absence of a Doha round on, which includes agriculture, what countries or regions, in the case of Europe, do to reform their agriculture policies is going to be an answer. And part of the Doha deal was already including the expectation of the EU, the reforms in the EU Common Agriculture Policy. Now, the big issue is whether the issue of sensitive products, which was also part of the Doha agreement, the draft agreement, is going to be able to survive if you don't get the other things that had been promised. So if unilaterally it goes ahead without a Doha deal, then it would be the best, even though we would not have gotten the farm. The big question then would be the farm bill in the U.S. as the other key component. But definitely what Europe does is going to be important, and also what they do on climate change. We are facing one issue with Europe right now. It's called RED. I always forget the apa sih RED? Lupa lagi. Renewable Energy Directive. I always get it mixed up with REDD. Renewable Energy Directive, where potentially Indonesian biofuel based on palm oil will be considered to have a higher CO2 emission standard than rapeseed and soybean and so on. And we are questioning it because we don't think the scientific basis is there for such a discussion. That's why I was saying earlier that getting a kind of a accepted CO2 standard on all these products is kind of the challenge in the future, so that we avoid discriminatory practices if they come up. And this is something we are discussing a lot with Europe. And we are thinking through in an anticipatory way how Indonesia should have a sustainable trade policy. And a lot of that has to do with, in a way, it's again a disciplinary mechanism for our own internal domestic policies. And it is anticipating where the issues are going to be when you talk about market access. Yeah, so it's a way for us to really begin educating our producers and exporters that you really need to be able to show you have sustainable sources, sustainable practices, because that's part of competition. And on competition, I'll tell you a final issue where it's come in. I'm coordinator of the World Competitiveness report that comes out of the World Economic Forum, and we've been asked to include sustainability in the competitiveness parameter. And it's been very difficult and very hard actually to quantify it, and it's been a lot of debate on how do you actually measure it. But I think it's a very interesting challenge, and I think that's projecting where the world is going to go, and it doesn't come from governments; it's going to come from consumers anyway. So, how do we deal with this in a way that's not going to cause distortions in trade, which will affect?
It'd be easy to finish, is it, with an agricultural agreement without other sectors involved? So that does make it difficult. It seems a particularly unfortunate situation to have very high world prices, which should make it so much easier to agree multilaterally to liberalise trade, and yet have a political cycle that isn't helpful. But are you really so pessimistic that even the G20 meeting can't perhaps try and bring something together by the end of the year for Doha?
I'm afraid I'm fairly pessimistic that we could do it. We could move forward too much this year, and then when you go into next year, then you're already into election year. So you probably have to wait till 2013. And then the question is, can you just sort of pick up where you left off in 2008? I think the world has changed and moved so much. So I'm not saying, that. So the big question for us is, I think, twofold. One is, how do we make sure that whatever happens, we don't lose confidence in the multilateral trading system, and to do that would include thinking very creatively or constructively or whatever, maybe realistically. What can you do in the meanwhile? While waiting for the right moment to have another multilateral round. And to me, agriculture is one of the most important components. Is there something you can do in agriculture which is not part of a single undertaking? Maybe not all of it. Maybe you can export subsidies. I don't know. A few of the export competition, STEs. I think those three could possibly be agreed on, because I think there was not much contention there. I mean, and it was what we call already fairly agreed upon. So maybe you can move on some parts of it. But this is still a question which we as trade ministers will be struggling through for the rest of the year. So maybe if you can give me a good idea tonight, I'm counting on you to start thinking and give me a few more good ideas. Thank you.